Welcome to Jagged Verge's first tutorial, and this one's particularly exciting. Why is that, Jonas?
Well, we have the opportunity to refactor a deployed Python server,
Deployed?
and yeah, there's a few customers that are using it for a company that's gifted us this wonderful script to go over for this series.
It's in production, okay.
Yeah, so they're a little bit scared to touch it because they're mostly a .NET and Windows shop, and they don't have any Python developers. And the original people who worked on the code no longer with them. So
Is there a reason for
I don't know. There might be. Um, but yeah, I mean, it makes sense to not have like a hodgepodge of a whole bunch of different languages, but I guess they do, and now they're trying to deal with it. So that's where we come into it. And yeah, it just seems like a really good opportunity to show people through dealing with a particularly unmaintainable piece of Python 2.5 code.
that? Now, why is that important? And how is that different than any other tutorial on how to fix broken code?
Um, I think there's a couple of things about it. Well, one of the things is just that we're dealing with an older version of Python, so we aren't necessarily going to have the availability of all the newest things. So we're going to have to deal with some, I guess, older software. But um, one of the big things is just that we're dealing with a real piece of code and trying to fix a real piece of running code. So unlike a lot of the tutorials that are out there that just have a small snippet or something that's contrived, it's quite a different task dealing with a bigger code base. A lot more, I guess, organizational ability has to go into it and techniques to get anywhere at all. Otherwise, you just get overwhelmed and swamped.
So this is just organically bad, is what you're saying?
Yeah, there's a few things in there. I mean, it's one of those situations where you've got like 10 different people that have touched the code at one point or another. So, like, some of the people that are better with the Python and just that programming stuff in general, that stuff's okay. There's some of it that isn't. So,
Now, while I'm not exactly a Python extraordinaire, it does seem to me that taking a look over the code, there's a lot of things in it that you just couldn't actually, as you say, contrive for your standard tutorials. This seems to be as real as it can get, and when you get someone with a level of coding or ability in programming development engineering, I don't think they'd actually be able to come up with this. Not only
yeah.
do I think they wouldn't be able to bring themselves to write it down and encourage anybody, I don't think it would even cross their mind to do some of the things I saw in that code.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's one of the really nice things about this as an educational piece is that when people are writing code and they've got a really good grasp of software engineering, they're going to write their code in such a way that they're going to avoid introducing too much complexity, and they're going to keep things arranged and organized in a way that like makes more sense. And some of this stuff just is really lacking in terms of overall structure and architecture. So, like someone who's really good at engineering software wouldn't run into such a bad architecture, I guess.
They would accidentally sort of put some structure in there, is what you're saying?
Yeah, I would think so.
And I think they would probably also set up their problems in such a way that there's a logical next step conclusion. And there's some stuff in that code, if any of the cussing that you were making as you were looking through it indicates, is that there is no logical sort of step-by-step progression to go from this pile of rubble to like this stone wall again.
Right. I mean, that's the thing. Like sometimes when you look at code and you're thinking of refactoring it in better engineered projects, usually you can sort of see, all right, I've got this little bit here, and I'll need to change that. The tricky thing is there isn't like an island of sanity in the code that's really well engineered that you can sort of use as a starting point and go forward. So just getting started and finding like where you are going to, I guess, just make your start on it is quite a tough task in itself. And that's usually not quite as bad when you have like a better code base you're dealing with.
I believe you found the best solution. Just head to the beer fridge.
Yeah,
That's the good
tempting.
place to start.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Like when you really when you first thought of when you see something is like, okay, this is so bad that like it should just be rewritten from the ground up. Um, that provides a pretty interesting opportunity to show people how you would actually refactor something that's substantially poorly structured. Um, like I mean, it's unmaintainable enough where I think if you were looking at it from like the return on investment point of view, it probably would be cheaper and quicker to just rewrite this. And Ko here has a article that he's been writing about exactly that, which we'll link you to. But yeah, I think this is a good example of something where refactoring probably isn't the right choice, but because it's not the right choice, it's actually an extremely good choice for making a video about refactoring techniques. If that makes any sense.
So since this is the first in the line, you've probably heard at some point our intent with these, but just in case, our intent with these videos is to bring some real world skill that we've acquired with some real world problems you guys have, sort of a challenge on both sides. Show the people that aren't familiar with refactoring or with replacing code or even rewriting code how one would approach that in different languages, different scenarios with basically different end goals in mind. And basically just sort of a tightening workshop. Of course, our abilities aren't always going to be better than the submissions. And, it should be a little bit of fun for everyone. It's something we would like to do a little more frequently. Right now, we're doing them as we can. We chose this one because it's actually particularly insane and just to show that we can actually, you know, step up to that kind of thing. It involves databases and networks and Python and MySQL and Lions and Tigers oh my. But it does sound kind of arrogant. Oh, we're going to fix your code, but at the same time, there may be people out there, the same people that post on Stack Overflow or on DevShed and or else, that actually may want to see that. Of course, we also plan to do some tutorials on or casting on tutorial pieces that don't involve just refactoring other people's code or our own code, but on how to create snippets and do other things. But the goal here is to have some fun, maybe be educational, maybe get corrected ourselves later on after you guys watch it. Maybe be given things that are beyond our own ability and have someone, say to us, well, this is where the problem actually is. Don't get really esoteric on that one because, esoteric isn't always equated with quality, but I mean, that would be my proclivity. And the refactoring series is really kind of Giannis's baby. I mean, I'm in here because that's kind of how I started my career. But my proclivity nowadays is I would rather rewrite almost everything you're going to hand me. I'm going to outline that in the article Giannis mentioned, but at the same time, I'm also going to write an article on the times I wouldn't and why I wouldn't do that either. This is definitely one of those times where I would have just sort of been like, okay, well, thank you for that. I'll take the job, and I would be slowly shuffling it under the carpet while I'm like, what server?
Yeah.
But it was fun to take a look at this.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I know personally I are a little bit more towards the refactoring side of things than Ko, but this is clear. This is an absolutely clear cut rewrite. In my opinion, I wouldn't attempt to do this if I was really if this is a really important thing that I was working on. I wouldn't refactor. It's a bit too far gone.
It's an important thing you're working on, just not for Jagged Verge. It's important they get it back fixed.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Not sure why that is, but we were just asked to take a look at it and make it work better than it does without replacing it. Not entirely sure, but
yeah, and I mean that's the thing. We respect the fact that there's a company that's submitted this code and they've asked to be anonymous with this, which is fine. And yeah, like we're happy to give it a go and just see what we can take out of it, and hopefully people are going to learn some stuff.
Well, this is going to be mostly you. I'll pop in and out on the database / other tricky connectivity and possibly a little bit on some of the semantical stuff. But for the most part, our Python guy here is Giannis, and I might come in for some general overview stuff, but for the most part, you're going to be listening to him. So let's get started on it.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Before you can get stuck into a big refactor, there are a few preliminary tasks that have to be done, and it all starts with gathering information. And one of the best places to start gathering information is the documentation. If you can find any formal documentation, informal documentation, auto-generated documentation from the source, like docstrings, doxygen, all of that stuff, that's really valuable. It'll give you a good starting point. And especially, as I've noted here, you want to find as much information about the API as you can. And that's especially important when you're refactoring, because you really want to maintain all of the API, until you can figure out whether or not you're able to actually break it. You have to basically satisfy the API that you had before. So if you can find an outline or documentation about the original API, that's very valuable because it gives you a good starting point. And gathering information about known issues is really good because it can start to give you a hint at things that you need to fix or areas that might end up getting fixed as you go along with the refactor. We'll cover those in this project as they come up, and they will a few times. The next thing is the architecture. Essentially, the more you know about the architecture, the better. And when you're refactoring, it's very valuable to know how the overall system works. Unfortunately for this particular project, the code has a very bad architecture and there isn't a whole lot of organization. So I'll just skip forward really quickly to a very high level overview of what the system does, because the, I guess, lower level details really aren't too pretty. Essentially, we have a point of sale device that hooks up with an inventory database. And the server, which is in the middle, is where our script is running, which we're going to refactor. That's the Python 2.5 server script that this whole project centered around. And essentially, the point of sale device has to get the information that it needs from the inventory database about, stock levels, prices, who can buy what, and all of that kind of thing. But it doesn't have any ability to actually connect up directly with the database because it's just a very low power embedded device. And it connects up via TCP/IP sockets and a very simple text protocol with a server, and then the server needs to process those commands and that data and update the inventory database accordingly. A very important thing I found from my professional experience of refactoring is setting up a task tracking process really early on is really valuable. And essentially, the point is that a lot of refactors, and especially the refactors that have been undertaken because the code base have got unmanageable, they're difficult to keep track of everything that's going on. Like, too much ends up going on and it's very easy to get overwhelmed. So I try to set up a very concrete process to track all of the different things that get thrown at me while I'm trying to refactor, so I can keep my brain free and keep on task. Now, doing that individually, if it's a small project, I might use something really simple like just a to-do file and put things in that. But once it starts getting more complicated, I would want to use something a bit more fully fledged, and that's especially the case if I was working on a team. For this project, I'm going to use Task Coach just because it's something I'm familiar with and it's fairly easy in an individual setting. By no means is this the only way to do it. So I would start here with my first task, which would be get code into version control, and that would basically be set up git and commit files. So this is the first task that we'll basically want to be doing. It's quite critical that we do this before we do anything else. There's nothing else in here, so there's no prerequisites. Now that we have the task tracker set up, we need to get the code in version control, which is hopefully obviously the only step that we absolutely mustn't skip in all of this process. Alright, so we have a Linux machine here that we're going to be doing the development on. Pretty straightforward to create the Git repository. So we'll just make that. We'll add all the files. Pretty straightforward. And you can see that the files we had have now been added in. So the next thing that I like to do in these situations, and this is especially the case if I've been dealing with like different platforms, the original files came from a Windows environment, is just to see what it looks like when we do this. So you can see here that we do have a problem with the line endings being Windows line endings, but the particular system here is Linux. And I definitely prefer it to just be checked out to the correct line ending. So if this is going to be deployed back on a Windows system, which it will be, I would want to make sure that that's sorted out. And we can do that via a git attributes file, which I will just show you in 1 second. So we can make that file, and I think text is probably what we want here. So we want to do something a little bit like this. And this should, I think, give us the correct line endings. So we'll just do that, and we'll look at that again. Beautiful. So now all we have is some problems with trailing white space. I'll get back to that in just a moment, though. So that's looking pretty good so far, and you know, I'll add the git attributes file as well, and we'll make a commit. And there we go. Now we have our first commit done. I mentioned before that there were trailing whitespace issues in this code. You can see in my editor that these trailing whitespaces are highlighted by these red blocks. If we go down a little bit, we'll probably see some other ones. So there's another one. The reason I like to deal with this sooner rather than later is because these trailing whitespaces show up in your git differences, but they don't add anything to the code, and they really only serve to make maintenance a little bit more difficult than it needs to be. I wouldn't really want to go through 2,000 odd lines of code or however many lines of code to fix all of this, and luckily there's a plugin for Vim that I use that will greatly simplify dealing with this problem. Other editors have their own ways of dealing with it, but this is what I'm using here. So you can see that it both highlights the trailing whitespace in red, and it provides this fixed whitespace command. So we'll just run that, and we'll see what this does. So you can see that it's got rid of the white spaces at the end of the lines now. So we'll just save that. And now if we look at git diff, you'll see that it's changed these lines, but you can't see the change in the lines just without actually going over and highlighting them. And this is the insidious thing. I mean, if you're looking through a change log, you don't want it cluttered up with these, well, there it's a non-change. So that's why I like dealing with it at the beginning. So we'll just add that now, and so we'll commit that, and now that part is done. Now that we have the code and version control, we can start actually scouring through the code and doing an assessment of what we really need to be changing. So let's have a look at the code and have a quick browse through it. At this stage, I'm just trying to jot down notes of things that are issues and places where I'd want to get started. So this is something that I'd put into the task tracking or issues tracking that I'm using. So in this case, we can mark off that we got the code into version control, so we've done that. And as things come up, I would be placing items into there. Now, because this is quite a large file, I had a look at it just before. As you can see, there's 2,181 lines in this one file, which is basically everything. I'm not going to go through all of it. For the purposes of an educational series, we'll go through a little bit at a time at the beginning of each episode, and then fix that thing that we looked at. So that's something that we would deal with. What we could do, just starting this, is it looks like, given the length of this piece of code, that we're going to want to break out functionality into different files and different modules. So that's something that I think could already be, made as a task. So create modules. We'll want to put so that would be a task that I would write down pretty much straight up here, is that we will need to create some modules to put various pieces of the code into. And we'll have to figure out what we want to create for those modules, and what we want to break out from this main file, because 2,000 plus lines of code in the one file is usually a very good sign that something's going wrong. It's hard to maintain that much in one file. So we'll have a little quick browse through this. First thing that I can see on this first page is that we've got these global variables that look like they're being used for configuration. That's a pretty bad sign. That would be something that we'd want to change, for example. So I'd make a note about that, and I would say reconfig from file, get rid of local So, I mean, we really don't want to have our global variables be used for configuration. It doesn't scale well. There's problems with that. Usually when you see things like this, you'll see problems with more types of global scope. I wouldn't be surprised if we see more of that sort of an issue. Yeah, like already here we're seeing some more global scope stuff, which might be necessary, but chances are it isn't. Usually it's just a bit of a sign of some bad code. Yeah, scrolling down a bit further, we can see there's not very consistent code formatting. We've got some places that have docstring, some places that not. So that's not a good sign. Just small code quality things like non-consistent spacing and stuff like that we'll fix up as we go along. So now it looks like this is where we start seeing the beginning of this big object that basically does everything. We have this init data, which is setting the state up. And one of the first things I see here is that there is, let's see, the ending line here is 276. And the starting line here is 200. So, I mean, in the init thing, we have 76 lines, which are mostly definitions of instance variables. So, well, it looks like a large number of these things are using these kind of magic numbered variables, like this 70, 89, 63, all of that. All of these things are codes that are coming out of the machine for the protocol, and you really want to have named variables there. Now, that's something to take a note of, for example, when I'm doing this initial code review. So fix up magic number variables. Now, I say constants here in a bit of a tongue-in-cheek manner because there are no real constant variables in Python. But the point isn't to make them constant so much as just giving the variables names and putting an end to this type of situation where you have a variable that's being assigned something that isn't arbitrary, but it's very hard to actually follow what that is. And now I need to be, looking up the scarce amount of documentation that I do have to figure out what's going on there. We've been going for a little while now, and I think this is actually a good place to wrap it up for this video. In the future, what we'll do is we will cover a topic in an episode, and then we'll do the refactoring for that. If I was doing this privately, though, I would scan through the whole file, and then I'd take notes on things I saw, and I'd start prioritizing fixing those. The problem from an educational point of view is that it's not very coherent. We'd be jumping around all over the place. So for the rest of the series, yeah, one video, one topic, one piece of refactoring. If you have any questions about this video or anything else you'd like to see in this series, I'd love to have a shot at answering it. So please do make a comment, and if you want to get into a more in-depth conversation, I'd recommend going over to jaggedverge.com and making a post there, and I'll do my best to answer whatever you come up with. If you'd like to see more of these videos made, or have your own code reviewed and refactored in one of these video series, please do have a look at our Patreon page. Any support that we get there would really help us continue making more of this series and dedicate more time to these projects. So any support would be very appreciated. And yeah, if you feel like these are good videos, feel free to subscribe on the YouTube channel. Until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.